The polished chrome of St. Jude's advanced diagnostic wing gleamed, reflecting Elara Vance's simple uniform as she moved silently among the hushed, minimalist corridors. She was just a ward nurse, diligent and unremarkable, her sensible shoes making no sound against the pristine floor. Yet, a faint, almost imperceptible scent, a metallic tang beneath the sterile air, prickled at her senses, a subtle dissonance emanating from the VIP patient's room. She paused, her eyes tracing a microscopic anomaly on a monitor that the automated systems flagged as within parameters, but her intuition screamed was a threat. Dr. Alistair Finch, the arrogant head of diagnostics, swept in with his self-assured team, their crisp lab coats rustling. "Nurse Vance, still dallying with your fanciful notions?" he scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. "Our cutting-edge equipment and elite specialists have everything under control. No need for your intuition here, we deal in data, not daydreams." His team chuckled, their gaze openly dismissive. Elara merely lowered her eyes, a familiar knot tightening in her stomach. They saw only a meek woman, easily ignored, but they couldn't see the silent, growing certainty within her, a certainty that, when the truth finally broke through, would not only expose their arrogance but dramatically save a life they were inadvertently jeopardizing. The hushed, sterile perfection of the St. Jude's advanced diagnostic wing was a world Elara moved through like a phantom. Polished chrome gleamed under recessed lights, reflecting the minimalist art adorning the pristine walls. Here, every whisper was carefully calibrated, every step measured, every credential meticulously displayed. It was an environment designed to exude control, precision, and an unspoken hierarchy, where Elara, with her slightly worn uniform and unassuming air, was at the very bottom. Dr. Alistair Finch strode through the wing like a conqueror, his starched white lab coat a beacon of authority. His team trailed him, Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a sharp-eyed geneticist, and Dr. Lydia Brandt, a coolly intellectual neuroscientist, among others. They moved with an almost synchronized confidence, their gazes sweeping over the cutting-edge equipment, rarely lingering on the more mundane staff. Finch, with his perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile that rarely reached his eyes, was the undisputed king of this domain, a man whose reputation was built on unassailable academic brilliance and a string of impossible diagnoses. His voice, when he spoke, was a smooth baritone, designed to project both intellect and gravitas. The patient currently occupying their collective brilliance was Mr. Harrison Thorne, a prominent tech mogul. His symptoms were baffling: intermittent episodes of profound fatigue, muscle weakness, and a peculiar metallic taste in his mouth that he described as the taste of old pennies after a storm. Standard tests had come back frustratingly inconclusive, and Thorne's usual vivacity was draining away, replaced by a deep-set worry that creased his brow even in sleep. Elara was responsible for Thorne's daily ward care, a role that put her in constant, intimate contact with his environment. While the diagnostic team dissected his blood work, scrutinized brain scans, and debated genetic markers in their high-tech conference room, Elara was changing his bed linens, monitoring his vitals, and fetching his requested, and often uneaten, meals. It was during these quiet, seemingly trivial tasks that her hidden senses awoke. The metallic tang Thorne described wasn't just in his mouth. Elara could catch its faint, almost imperceptible whisper in the air around his bed, a subtle note clinging to his skin and the fabric of his pajamas. It wasn't the usual hospital scent of antiseptic and stale coffee. This was something else, sharp and cold, like very old copper. She also noticed the almost imperceptible film that seemed to settle on the surface of his water glass, a pearlescent shimmer that vanished the moment a nurse touched it. And there was a faint, almost musky undertone to the fresh flowers delivered daily, a smell she couldn't quite place, but one that seemed to clash with the metallic tang, rather than mask it. One morning, during Finch's highly anticipated ward rounds, Thorne was particularly weak. His skin had a slight, unusual pallor, and the metallic note in the air was stronger than usual. Dr. Finch, flanked by Tanaka and Brandt, stood at the foot of Thorne's bed, reviewing a tablet displaying his latest physiological readouts. "Mr. Thorne, how are we feeling today?" Finch asked, his voice carefully modulated to convey concern without genuine warmth. Thorne managed a weak smile. "Tired, doctor. So very tired. And the taste, it's worse today. Like I've been sucking on a mouthful of dimes." Finch nodded, stroking his chin. We understand. We're still running extensive tests. Dr. Tanaka is exploring some rare metabolic pathways, and Dr. Brandt is examining potential neurological microlesions. He turned to his team. Any new insights, Kenji, Lydia? Tanaka cleared his throat. Preliminary gene sequencing on exon 3 hasn't yielded anything conclusive, but we're expanding our search to 12. New theories suggest. Elara, standing quietly by the drip, felt a tremor of intuition. The metallic tang, the extreme fatigue, the subtle, almost imperceptible residue she'd seen. Excuse me, doctor, she interjected, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes fixed on the floor rather than Finch's imperious gaze. I've noticed a faint metallic scent around Mr. Thorne. It seems stronger when he's weaker. And sometimes, a slight film on his water glass. She braced herself for the inevitable. Finch slowly turned, an eyebrow arching in exaggerated surprise. His gaze swept over Elara, from her sensible shoes to her pulled-back hair, taking in every detail of her unremarkable appearance. A small, humorless smile played on his lips. Nurse Vance, I appreciate your attentiveness. However, as I've explained, we are dealing with complex physiological markers here, not scents or films that fall within the purview of basic ward observation. His tone was dismissive, yet laced with a practiced condescension that made it sting more than an outright insult. Dr. Brandt chuckled softly, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. Perhaps, nurse, your olfactory senses are simply more acute to the pervasive hospital disinfectants. Dr. Tanaka, ever the pragmatist, chimed in, our spectrometry analysis, Nurse Vance, is capable of detecting substances down to parts per trillion. I assure you, if there were any unusual environmental compounds, we would know. He pointed a laser pen at a holographic display of complex molecular structures, as if to underscore his point. Elara felt the familiar flush creep up her neck. She had no complex data, no impressive academic acronyms to back her up. Only a certainty that thrummed beneath her skin. She merely nodded, lowering her eyes further, retreating into her expected role of quiet compliance. The knot in her stomach tightened. Days turned into a week. Thorne's condition continued to fluctuate, often worsening in the late afternoon. The diagnostic team, in a flurry of activity, ordered more advanced imaging, ran obscure blood panels, and even considered a lumbar puncture. Each test came back within normal limits or inconclusive for the specific conditions they were investigating. Frustration mounted among the elite team, but their self-assurance remained largely intact, merely shifting the blame to the complexity of the human body. Elara continued her routine. She noticed the slight, lingering aroma of ozone in Thorne's room after a new, highly sophisticated air purifier was installed, an expensive unit designed to filter even the most minute allergens. She also observed a faint, sweet, almost floral scent emanating from the new, artisanal hand soap introduced into the executive suite bathrooms, a scent she found unexpectedly cloying and somehow wrong in the context of the metallic tang. Her hyper-observational skills picked up on the fact that Thorne seemed slightly better after his room was thoroughly aired out following cleaning, and worse after periods when the specialized air purifier had been running continuously. These were tiny, almost imperceptible correlations, mere whispers against the roaring tide of high-tech diagnostics. During another particularly tense round, Thorne experienced a dizzy spell, nearly falling from his chair. His breathing was shallow, and the metallic taste, he reported, was now so strong it felt like he was tasting blood. Dr. Finch, looking perturbed, snapped orders to his team. Run a full heavy metals panel immediately. Recheck for any environmental exposures. Doctor, Elara ventured again, her voice even softer this time, I've noticed that the air purifier in his room seems to produce a faint ozone smell, especially when it's running on its highest setting. And his symptoms seem to, correlate with its continuous operation. She gestured vaguely towards the gleaming, futuristic device in the corner. Finch stopped, mid-stride, and turned slowly. His expression was a carefully controlled mask of polite disbelief, bordering on offense. Nurse Vance, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerously calm level. That air purifier is a medical-grade unit, specifically designed by advanced biophysicists to remove harmful particulates, not introduce them. It's an investment in premium air quality, costing more than your annual salary, I might add. Are you suggesting a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment designed by MIT graduates is causing Mr. Thorne's complex neurological and metabolic distress? He let out a short, incredulous laugh. Perhaps you confuse the sterile hum of technology with some imagined environmental toxin? Dr. Brandt snickered openly. Perhaps Nurse Vance believes a simple open window would be a superior diagnostic tool to a full spectroscopic analysis, Dr. Tanaka, ever the technical expert, added, the ozone output of that unit is well below any clinical threshold, nurse. We monitor it constantly. He sounded bored, as if explaining basic physics to a child. Thorne, despite his weakness, managed to speak. She does seem to notice things, Dr. Finch. The room does feel clearer when the windows are open. Finch merely offered a patronizing smile to Thorne. Mr. Thorne, with all due respect, fatigue can play tricks on the mind. We assure you, our methods are rigorously scientific. We appreciate Nurse Vance's quaint observations, but they are not relevant to a differential diagnosis. He then turned back to his team, pointedly excluding Elara from the conversation. Focus on the heavy metals panel. I want those results yesterday. Later that day, as Elara was meticulously cleaning Thorne's room, she noticed something else. A subtle discoloration on the leaves of a potted plant near the window, a plant that had always seemed healthy. The edges were turning a faint, almost translucent yellow, and there was that metallic tang, clinging to the leaves, stronger than in other parts of the room. It was another piece of the puzzle, a whisper from the environment that the sophisticated machines couldn't, or wouldn't, detect. The humiliation of the morning still stung, but a cold, hard resolve began to crystallize within her. They might dismiss her, ridicule her, but the patient was suffering, and the environment was speaking to her in a language they couldn't comprehend. She knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in her bones, that she was right, and that their arrogance was blinding them to a truth that was literally under their noses. Elara's resolve hardened, coalescing into a quiet but unyielding core within her. They might dismiss her, ridicule her, but the patient was suffering, and the environment was speaking to her in a language they couldn't comprehend. She knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in her bones, that she was right, and that their arrogance was blinding them to a truth that was literally under their noses. The gleaming surfaces of the advanced diagnostic wing seemed to mock her intuition. Every polished chrome fixture, every pristine white wall, every hushed whisper of a specialist spoke of a world where her kind of knowledge was obsolete. Yet, as she moved through the patient's private suite, her senses, honed by years of quiet observation, picked up discordant notes the machines ignored. The faint metallic tang she'd first noticed had subtly shifted, now interwoven with a whisper of something more organic, almost vegetal, yet disturbingly synthetic. It clung to the filtered air, a phantom signature she couldn't quite place, but one that prickled at the back of her throat and left a faint, persistent ache behind her eyes. The patient, Mr. Harrison, a prominent industrialist, lay restless, his carefully calibrated vital signs subtly deviating from their baseline, despite Dr. Finch's team having run every conceivable test. They focused on his physiology, on the complex interplay of internal markers, while Elara felt the room itself was an accomplice. She ran her hand over a perfectly smooth, newly installed panel on the wall, her fingers discerning an almost imperceptible residue, a fine dust that no cleaning crew, no advanced air filtration system, had managed to entirely eradicate. She bent closer, inhaling deeply, and the new scent sharpened, a faint, almost sweet note underlying the metallic, a scent she vaguely associated with some kind of industrial sealant or binder, but one that was subtly off, alien. Later that afternoon, during Dr. Finch's grand rounds, the atmosphere in Mr. Harrison's suite was even more tense. Finch, flanked by his immaculately dressed team, reviewed the latest, inconclusive results on a floating holographic display. His voice, smooth and authoritative, filled the hushed room, dissecting data points with an air of clinical omniscience. As you can see, Finch declared, gesturing at a complex neural pathway map, all neurological indicators remain within the parameters of Unexplained irritability. We have ruled out systemic infection, viral load remains negligible, and environmental toxins have been conclusively dismissed by both spectroscopic and gas chromatography analysis of air and surface samples. His gaze swept over his team, a self-satisfied nod passing between them. He then turned to Elara, who was quietly adjusting Mr. Harrison's pillow, her movements economical and gentle. Nurse Vance, I trust you have ensured Mr. Harrison is comfortable, despite his unquantifiable distress. The implication was clear. Her role was purely custodial, her observations irrelevant. Elara straightened, her voice soft but clear. Dr. Finch, with all due respect, I believe the environmental analysis may have missed something. There's a subtle olfactory signature, and a residue on the wall panels, particularly near the air vents. I suspect it's a compound not typically screened for, perhaps a byproduct of the recent renovations. A ripple of amusement spread through Finch's team. Dr. Aristorn, Finch's sharp-featured protégé, snorted derisively. An olfactory signature, Nurse Vance? Are we to consult a diviner now? Our GCMS system is sensitive to parts per trillion. Do you honestly believe your nose can detect what our million-dollar equipment cannot? Finch's smile was a thin, predatory line. Nurse Vance, your dedication to patient comfort is commendable. However, our diagnostic methods are built on empirical data, not anecdotal sensory input. We are dealing with a complex physiological mystery here, not a perfumery. Perhaps you could focus on the patient's vital signs, which are quantifiable, rather than inventing new ones. His tone, though outwardly polite, was laced with acid, designed to belittle. Elara felt the familiar flush rise to her cheeks, but the core of her resolve held firm. With respect, Dr. Finch, the patient's agitation seems to worsen after periods when the new ventilation system cycles. I've noticed a pattern. The residue feels like an aerosolized particulate that might interact with certain pre-existing conditions. She knew she was pushing it, speaking above her station, but Mr. Harrison's shallow, rapid breathing filled the silent room. Finch's face hardened. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, though loud enough for everyone to hear. Nurse Vance, your persistent theories are becoming a liability. Do you understand the resources being expended here? The reputation of this wing? We do not tolerate speculative nonsense. We deal in facts. You are a nurse, not a toxicologist. And certainly not a diagnostic specialist. He paused, letting the words hang in the air, weighted with disdain. Are you implying our entire team, with decades of combined expertise and cutting-edge technology, has overlooked something so obvious that only your supernose could possibly detect it? The team exchanged smug looks. This was a public execution of her credibility, carefully orchestrated. Elara felt the weight of their combined contempt, a humiliation that burned far deeper than any physical blow. Her job, her career, her very presence in this elite institution felt suddenly precarious. Finch had backed her into a corner. Perhaps, Finch continued, his voice dripping with mock sincerity, you believe you could pinpoint this elusive, unquantifiable compound that has escaped the notice of every censor, every specialist, and every academic in this building? He gestured around the pristine room. Tell us, Nurse Vance. If it's so apparent to you, precisely what is this substance? What is its chemical composition? What are its exact physiological effects? And where, exactly, is it coming from, if not from the patient himself? He leaned in, a cruel glint in his eyes. Give us a definitive, testable hypothesis, Nurse Vance. Something we can actually verify. Otherwise, I suggest you confine your observations to matters within your established purview. Do you think you can do that? Provide us with a complete and verifiable diagnostic profile, using only your unique talents? By tomorrow morning, perhaps? Without disturbing our existing diagnostic protocols, of course. The challenge hung in the air, impossible, designed to crush her. He was asking her to perform a feat of advanced toxicology and environmental science without any lab equipment, based purely on her senses, and within an impossible time frame. He expected her to crumble, to admit defeat, and finally, to know her place. The room was silent, save for the faint whir of the machines and the ragged breath of the patient. The peak of her humiliation had been reached, and now, the impossible gauntlet had been thrown. "You're deep in this now, aren't you? The truth is so close. Don't miss a single twist or revelation as we unravel everything." To keep up with this story and see what's next, hit that subscribe button. Join us on this journey. A strange calm settled over Elara. The air in the room, once thick with Dr. Finch's contempt, now felt charged with a different kind of energy, a desperate plea from the man gasping on the bed. She looked at the patient, not at Finch. His skin was mottled, his breathing shallow, his eyes, even behind the haze of his suffering, held a flicker of fear. This wasn't about her humiliation anymore. This was about life. She took a deep, deliberate breath, drawing in the cacophony of scents that usually she filtered out in the sterile environment. First, the ubiquitous hospital smell, antiseptic, cleaning agents, the faint metallic tang of medical equipment, the underlying, slightly sweet odor of human distress. But then, as her mind sharpened, she began to peel back the layers. Her gaze swept over the room, every detail a potential clue. The polished chrome reflected the fluorescent lights with blinding precision, but she wasn't looking at the gleam. She was observing the minute dust motes dancing in the air, barely visible, catching the light as they drifted. Her eyes lingered on the crisp, white bed linens, then drifted to the patient's exposed forearm, noting the subtle, almost imperceptible discoloration around in foresight that the monitors hadn't flagged as inflammation. She noticed the faint, greenish residue on a discarded tissue box, a different shade from the usual medical waste. She moved closer to the patient, her steps silent, a stark contrast to Finch's heavy tread. She leaned in, not touching, but allowing her senses to be fully immersed. The scent from his skin was more complex than general illness. There was a faint, cloying sweetness, almost like overripe fruit, but underlaid with something acrid, almost plasticky, a combination she knew wasn't natural for a human body. It wasn't the smell of a common allergic reaction or a viral infection. It spoke of a compound, something being metabolized that shouldn't be there. Finch let out a derisive huff. "Well, Vance, do you need a deeper sniff? Perhaps a taste?" His team snickered, finding courage in his bravado. Elara ignored him. Her focus was absolute. She began to catalog. The patient's breath carried that same strange, sweet acrid note, stronger now. His hair, freshly washed by the nursing staff, still held a faint, lingering fragrance she didn't recognize as any standard hospital product. It was subtly floral, yet had an artificial undertone. She moved to the oxygen mask, noting the condensation, and then, slowly, to the pristine white pillow. She pressed her nose close. Here, it was distinct. A subtle, almost imperceptible sheen on the fabric, a different texture. And the smell, a faint, powdery scent, delicate, yet clinging, with that same peculiar artificial sweetness she detected from the patient, mingled with something else, a very faint, almost metallic aroma that spoke of synthetic dyes or pigments. It wasn't from the standard hospital laundry. Her mind raced, connecting disparate observations. The dust motes, the greenish residue, the skin discoloration, the unique scent profile. Her internal database, honed over decades of quiet observation, sifted through thousands of environmental factors, natural compounds, and obscure industrial byproducts. She remembered a similar scent from her youth, exploring an abandoned textile mill near her village, a specific dye used in antiquated processes. She straightened up, her gaze now sharp, decisive. "The patient is suffering from a reaction to a specific textile dye," she stated, her voice quiet but ringing with a new clarity. Dr. Finch scoffed, stepping forward. "A textile dye? Vance, are you serious? We've screened for common allergens, for environmental toxins, for everything. This is a state-of-the-art facility. His clothes were removed hours ago, sterilized." "Not his clothes, Dr. Finch," Elara replied, her eyes unwavering. "And not a common allergen. It's a specific azo dye, likely one derived from a less common aniline, possibly a variant of CI acid yellow 34, but with a unique metallic salt complex. I detect faint traces of copper and an unusual aldehyde in the composition. It's a powerful sensitizer, especially when inhaled or absorbed transdermally over time. Her words hung in the air, a series of precise chemical descriptors that sounded utterly alien in her soft, unassuming voice. The expressions on the faces of Finch's team shifted from amusement to bewilderment. And where, pray tell, did this obscure chemical come from? Finch demanded, his voice laced with venom, but a flicker of doubt now danced in his eyes. Elara pointed to the pillow. The pillowcase. Not from the hospital's standard supply. It's custom-made, isn't it? For VIP clients? Note the subtle sheen, the slightly different weave. This particular dye, while not in widespread use today due to its high reactivity, offers a particularly vibrant, long-lasting yellow or chartreuse hue. Some exclusive, boutique manufacturers still utilize it for bespoke linens, advertising its heritage quality. I believe it was a gift, perhaps a personal pillow or blanket brought from home by a well-meaning family member. She then moved to a small, ornamental throw cushion tucked beside the patient's bed, one that had been placed there earlier by a family member, unnoticed amidst the medical equipment. She picked it up gently, a simple, elegant piece in a vibrant chartreuse green. This one, she said, her voice dropping slightly, but carrying absolute conviction. The scent is far stronger here. The faint powdery residue, the artificial sweetness, the metallic undertone. It matches the patient's emanations perfectly. The continuous oxygen flow in the room, combined with the fabric's proximity, would have aerosolized the microscopic dye particles, allowing for constant inhalation and skin absorption, even through his hospital gown. The room fell into a stunned silence. Finch's self-assured smile had vanished, replaced by a gaping maw. His team members exchanged incredulous glances. How could she know this? How could she describe such specific chemical compounds from mere scent? Aniline? Metallic salts? Vance, this is pure conjecture. Finch finally sputtered, trying to reclaim his authority, though his voice wavered. It can be confirmed, Elara stated calmly. A simple surface swab of this cushion, followed by gas chromatography mass spectrometry, would identify the specific dye compound. But for immediate relief, we need to remove all sources. Ventilate the room thoroughly. And administer a specific broad-spectrum antihistamine and a bronchodilator immediately, one that specifically targets histamine release from mast cells, as this particular compound acts as a powerful mast cell degranulator, not just a simple allergen. She named a rarely used, highly effective drug. Dr. Anya Sharma, a young, brilliant allergist from Finch's team, stepped forward, her eyes wide. Mast cell degranulator, that would explain the refractory nature of his symptoms to our standard protocols and the rapid progression of his respiratory distress, Dr. Finch. The specialized antihistamine, it's a strong drug, but it makes sense if it's that specific compound. She looked at Elara, a dawning respect in her gaze. Finch, caught between his ego and the undeniable logic Elara presented, hesitated for a crucial moment. The patient let out a ragged, desperate cough. That sound, more than any argument, galvanized him. Sharma, run the swab, Finch barked, though his voice was devoid of its usual authority. Nurse Vance, bring the recommended medication. Now. The order, though grudgingly given, was a capitulation. Elara moved with swift purpose, retrieving the specified medication. Within minutes, the room was cleared of the offending cushion, and the potent antihistamine was administered. Slowly, miraculously, the patient's breathing began to ease. The mottling on his skin began to recede, his shallow gasps becoming deeper, more regular. A wave of relief, potent and palpable, washed over the ward. Dr. Sharma, returning with the initial results from the rapid spectrometer, held up a tablet. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and awe. Dr. Finch, she's right. The swab confirms the presence of an azo dye compound. It's a precise match to her description. Copper, aldehyde, all there. Finch stared at the screen, then at Elara. His jaw hung slack. His meticulously constructed world of empirical data and academic superiority had just been dismantled, not by a supercomputer, but by a quiet nurse with an extraordinary nose and an even more extraordinary mind. The room, once witness to Elara's humiliation, was now silent testament to her spectacular triumph. The silence that followed was not merely the absence of sound, but a tangible weight, pressing down on every soul in the St. Jude's Advanced Diagnostic Wing. Dr. Finch's jaw remained unhinged, his eyes flickering between the spectral green data on the screen and Elara, who stood patiently, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. The polished chrome and glass of the lab, usually a testament to unassailable scientific precision, now seemed to shimmer with a new, disorienting truth. Finch's world wasn't just dismantled, it was in freefall, and he grasped desperately for a logical branch to cling to. An anomaly, he muttered, his voice hoarse, a stark contrast to his usual booming authority. A contaminant in the sample. Or a calibration error. He shot a wild, accusing glance at the lead lab technician, Dr. Eris Thorne, a man usually as unflappable as Finch himself. Thorne, however, merely shook his head, his face pale. Dr. Finch, the system was triple-checked. The spectral analysis is clear. The mass spec confirms it. It's irrefutable. Elara's gaze, steady and unwavering, finally met Finch's. There was no "I told you so" in her expression, no hint of triumph. Only a quiet, resolute concern. The compound's half-life is relatively short within the bloodstream, especially in a compromised system, she stated, her voice soft but cutting through the thick silence like a scalpel. Without immediate intervention, the cellular damage will continue to spread rapidly. We need a chelating agent that specifically targets organometallic compounds, particularly those with copper coordination sites, and an accelerated detoxification protocol. Standard liver support won't be enough. Her words weren't a challenge, they were a diagnosis, delivered with the same unassuming confidence that had so often been mistaken for timidity. This was not Elara Vance, the diligent but unremarkable nurse. This was Elara Vance, the intuitive oracle, whose senses had pierced a veil that the most advanced technology had deemed impenetrable. The crowd in the observation gallery, initially a mix of junior doctors, ward managers, and a few high-level administrators who had been observing the VIP patient case, stirred. Whispers rippled through them, hushed at first, then growing into an excited murmur. Faces that had earlier held expressions of polite skepticism or outright boredom were now alight with a dawning, undeniable awe. Dr. Anya Sharma, Finch's bright but often overlooked research assistant, leaned forward, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and reluctant admiration. She had dismissed Elara's early hunches as irrational, but now she was watching scientific history unfold. The air thickened with a sudden, universal shift in respect. One of the administrators, a woman named Ms. Davies, known for her sharp business acumen and even sharper tongue, removed her glasses slowly, her gaze fixed on Elara. A chelating agent. She mused aloud, her voice barely audible. Dr. Finch, is there such a protocol for this specific compound? Finch flinched, as if physically struck. His scientific pride was in tatters. To admit he hadn't even considered such a possibility, that his entire team had been chasing phantom autoimmune responses, was anathema to everything he stood for. Yet, the evidence was undeniable. He ran a hand through his impeccably styled hair, his earlier arrogance melting into a visible struggle. Elara, observing his internal turmoil, spoke again, her voice a soothing balm amidst the tension. The dye is often used in certain industrial pigments, especially those resistant to fading under UV light. The copper serves as a chromophore stabilizer. I've encountered similar compounds in environmental exposure cases, albeit in much lower concentrations, in my previous role. We could consider something like dipenicillamine, or perhaps trientine, carefully titrated. The patient's renal function would need continuous, aggressive monitoring, of course. Her previous role. It was a quiet revelation, a hint at a depth of experience that none of them had bothered to ask about. The crowd exchanged glances. A ward nurse, talking about chromophores and chelating agents with such precise, unhesitant knowledge. It wasn't just an extraordinary nose, it was an extraordinary mind, honed by observation and real-world application, not just textbook theory. Finch finally pushed himself away from the console, his posture less rigid, his shoulders slightly slumped. He looked at Elara, truly looked at her, for the first time. Not as an inconvenience, not as an invisible cog in the machine, but as a peer, perhaps even a superior in this specific, critical moment. His face was a mask of defeat, but also, surprisingly, a flicker of something new, reluctant curiosity. Dr. Thorne, Finch finally managed, his voice still strained, initiate a stat order for D-penicillamine. Prepare for immediate administration. And Elara, he swallowed, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. Can you consult with the pharmacy on the precise dosage based on the patient's current metabolic panel and estimated compound load? And then, explain to us, precisely, how you detected this. The process, the nuances. Everything. The words were not a request, they were an order, but devoid of the usual condescension. They carried the weight of a man humbled, forced to acknowledge a truth beyond his comprehension. The team, initially stunned, sprang into action, a new urgency in their movements, one born not of routine, but of crisis averted and a newfound, profound respect. Dr. Sharma quickly opened new windows on her terminal, searching for information on azocopper complexes and chelation therapies. Elara simply nodded, a small, almost imperceptible tilt of her head. Her focus remained on the well-being of the patient, a fragile life hanging by a thread, now finally given a fighting chance. She moved towards Thorne, her sensible shoes making barely a sound on the polished floor, her uniform still simple and slightly worn, but now radiating an undeniable aura of quiet power. The quiet nurse, once seen as utterly unremarkable, had just saved a life that the combined might of St. Jude's Advanced Diagnostic Wing had almost lost. The hushed tones of the elite setting had given way to the buzzing hum of renewed hope, and the unspoken acknowledgement that true genius often wore the most unassuming disguise. The once skeptical eyes of the crowd now followed Elara, each gaze filled with the growing amazement of witnessing a miracle. The hierarchy of St. Jude's had just been dramatically, irrevocably reshuffled. Elara Vance, her simple uniform a stark contrast to the sterile gleam of the St. Jude's Advanced Diagnostic Wing, still moved with the quiet grace of a nurse attending to a patient. The buzz of renewed hope, though, had solidified into a palpable current of awe, tracing the path of her every small movement. The patient, their breathing now even, their color returning, was being gently settled. Elara's hand rested for a moment on their forehead, a gesture of profound empathy that spoke volumes beyond any medical procedure. Dr. Alastair Finch, a man usually brimming with confident pronouncements, stood frozen. His self-assured team, so quick to dismiss, now shuffled their feet, their eyes darting between their inert, sophisticated equipment and the unassuming woman who had just achieved what their combined intellect and technology could not. The silence, once merely hushed, had become thick with unasked questions and unacknowledged shame. It was Dr. Evelyn Reed, head of internal medicine and a renowned diagnostician known for her exacting standards, who broke the spell. Her voice, usually sharp and authoritative, was now tinged with an unfamiliar tremor of wonder. "Nurse Vance," she began, stepping forward, her gaze fixed on Elara, "what exactly, how did you?" Elara finally looked up, her blue eyes, often downcast, now held a deep, steady clarity. She did not seek to grandstand, nor did she meet Dr. Finch's averted gaze. Her focus remained on the well-being of the room, and perhaps, the unspoken suffering of those who had come so close to failure. It was a combination of factors, Dr. Reed, Elara began, her voice soft but surprisingly clear in the hushed room. She spoke not of intuition alone, but of observation, a skill honed over decades on the wards, noticing what others deemed irrelevant. When the patient was first brought in, I detected a very faint, almost imperceptible scent. A metallic tang, yes, consistent with some types of severe systemic distress, but under it, a subtle note of Anethum graveolens. Dill. A ripple of confusion went through the gathered experts. Dill? One of Dr. Finch's junior residents scoffed softly, but a withering look from Dr. Reed silenced him instantly. Elara continued, unperturbed. It wasn't strong enough to be from their food, and the patient's diet history didn't include it. Then, I noticed a very slight, atypical discoloration on the patient's fingernails, a pale, almost silvery tint that wasn't present yesterday during my routine rounds. And later, when they started to decline rapidly, I picked up another subtle scent from their perspiration, a faint, sweet, almond-like bitterness, mingled with that persistent dill. She paused, allowing the gravity of her observations to settle. The diagnostic reports indicated a rapidly progressing, atypical toxicity, but none of the standard panels yielded a match. However, the combination of those specific scents, dill and bitter almond, along with the silvery nail discoloration, pointed me towards a rare, acute reaction to a particular organophosphate pesticide. Specifically, one that uses dill extract as a synergist, a potent compound designed to enhance its efficacy, making it unusually fast-acting and difficult to detect by conventional means due to its rapid breakdown into less identifiable metabolites. Dr. Finch's face was a mask of disbelief. "Impossible," he muttered, finally finding his voice. "Our tox panel covers hundreds of compounds. We ran advanced chromatography. Nothing indicated anything of the sort." Elara finally met his gaze, not with triumph, but with a gentle, unwavering certainty. "Indeed, Doctor. That particular synergist, though, is often overlooked. It's an emerging compound, not yet widely cataloged in standard hospital protocols, especially not in a highly purified form. It metabolizes uniquely. But its primary markers, volatile organic compounds released from the skin and breath, are distinct to the acutely sensitive nose." She paused, then added, "The source, I believe, was a trace residue on the synthetic fibers of a new blanket, delivered yesterday, specifically designed for hypoallergenic environments. It must have been exposed to the pesticide during manufacturing or transport." A gasp rippled through the onlookers. A blanket. The hospital's pristine, elite environment, ironically, had been the conduit. Dr. Reed took a step closer to Elara, her eyes wide with dawning comprehension and profound respect. "You mean, your sense of smell, coupled with your knowledge of obscure environmental toxicology and patient observation, allowed you to pinpoint a specific, rare organophosphate that our multi-million-dollar equipment and highly specialized team completely missed." Her voice was barely a whisper. Elara nodded simply. "The initial stages of exposure often present with symptoms that mimic other conditions. It's the unique combination of the olfactory markers and the physiological changes that guided me." She then quietly explained the precise antidote she had requested, a specific combination of atropine and pralidoxine chloride, delivered in a precise sequence, which she had insisted upon, overriding the initial treatment plan, even as Dr. Finch had scoffed. The sheer, undeniable genius of her deduction hung heavy in the air. This wasn't guesswork, it was a meticulously constructed diagnostic pathway built on data points invisible to others. Professor Armitage, an internationally renowned toxicologist who had been observing via video link, his face projected onto a large screen, cleared his throat. His voice, usually dry and academic, boomed with an almost reverential tone. "Nurse Vance," he said, "I have spent 40 years in this field, studying the very compounds you describe. Your observations are not merely accurate, they are breathtakingly precise. The synergy with anethum graveolens in that new generation of compounds is known only to a handful of specialists globally. To detect it by scent, and to correlate it with the subtle physiological indicators you noted, without the aid of a mass spectrometer, it is, quite frankly, unparalleled. A diagnostic feat of the highest order." His words, echoing from the screen, were the ultimate validation. Dr. Finch, who had always prided himself on his academic credentials, visibly deflated, his shoulders slumping. His team stared at their feet, their faces burning. The polished chrome and minimalist design of the wing, usually so imposing, now seemed to mock their failure. Their rigid adherence to data and status had blinded them. Elara, however, seemed almost embarrassed by the praise. She gave a small, humble shrug. "I only did what was necessary for the patient," she murmured, her gaze returning to the recovering individual. "Every detail, every symptom, no matter how small, tells a story." This was the moment. The quiet ward nurse, once unremarkable, had not only saved a life but had also exposed the critical flaw in an entire system. Her empathetic wisdom, her hyper-observational skills, and her deep, practical knowledge had trumped the arrogance of academic elitism. The hierarchy of St. Jude's had not just been reshuffled, it had been fundamentally redefined. The true genius, the powerful, undeniable force of healing, stood not in the gleaming chrome but in the quiet, observant heart of Elara Vance. Her triumph was complete, echoing not in boasts, but in the steady, hopeful beat of a saved life. A stunned silence gripped the St. Jude's advanced diagnostic wing. The hushed tones that usually permeated the polished chrome and minimalist design had evaporated, replaced by the ringing clarity of Elara's precise diagnosis, now undeniably confirmed by the patient's palpable improvement. The air, usually thick with the scent of sterile professionalism and the faint hum of advanced machinery, now carried an undeniable current of revelation. Then, a ripple started. It began with the patient's wife, her face, etched with weeks of fear and exhaustion, suddenly breaking into profound relief. A single, choked sob escaped her, quickly followed by the murmured gratitude of their grown children, their eyes moist as they looked at Elara, not Dr. Finch. A junior resident, who had often flinched under Dr. Finch's withering critiques, let out an audible gasp of admiration. Slowly, tentatively, a soft applause began, spreading from the small, gathered family members to the wider circle of medical staff, administrators, and even the hospital board members present. It was a hesitant, almost reverent applause, acknowledging not just a medical breakthrough, but a profound shift in understanding. Faces that had worn expressions of skeptical detachment or academic superiority now mirrored a complex blend of awe, shame, and burgeoning respect. The polished chrome and gleaming surfaces of the wing, usually reflecting only the meticulous order of cutting-edge science, now seemed to reflect the stark truth of human error and overlooked wisdom. Elara, for her part, remained steadfast, her unassuming demeanor unwavering. When the applause swelled, her gaze, rather than seeking acknowledgement, drifted back to the patient. She reached out, her fingers gently checking the pulse at the wrist, her thumb brushing the patient's forehead to gauge the temperature. A faint flush rose on her cheeks, but she didn't offer a theatrical bow or a triumphant grin. Her victory was not for public consumption, it was etched in the steady, hopeful beat beneath her fingertips. "The patient will need continued monitoring and a carefully adjusted regimen of the antidote," she murmured softly to the attending nurse, her voice barely above a whisper, her focus resolutely on the next immediate step of care. "The sensitivity to the compound will be high for a few days." A board member, Mr. Harrison, a man known for his astute, no-nonsense leadership, cleared his throat, stepping forward. His initial stern expression had softened into something akin to a profound apology. "Nurse Vance," he began, his voice resonating through the now quiet wing, your contribution here is immeasurable. The St. Jude's board is deeply indebted." Elara finally looked up, her gaze meeting his, clear and unwavering. "I only did what was necessary, Mr. Harrison," she replied, her voice still soft, "to ensure the patient's well-being. It was a team effort to get to this point, after all." Her humility was genuine, not feigned. She deflected the spotlight as naturally as she breathed, her dedication to healing overriding any personal gratification. Yet, everyone in the room knew her words, though gracious, held a subtle, unstated truth. The team had been led astray, and it was her lone, quiet wisdom that had brought them back from the precipice. But while Elara found solace in the steadying breath of her patient and the quiet gratitude of the family, the same could not be said for Dr. Alastair Finch and his self-assured team. The triumph of the ward nurse was their spectacular, public humiliation. Dr. Finch stood frozen, his immaculate suit now feeling like a costume, his usually confident posture slumped, almost imperceptibly, but enough for anyone who knew him to register the shift. The condescending remarks, the public ridiculing of Elara's observations, every dismissive glance, every cutting word he had uttered over the past weeks, now echoed in the cavernous silence of the wing, each one a hammer blow to his once unassailable reputation. His face, usually a mask of controlled arrogance, was a canvas of disbelief, then dawning horror. The very foundation of his identity, his academic credentials, his reliance on complex data, his unwavering belief in his own elite superiority, had crumbled before the unassuming strength of a simple nurse's intuition. Mr. Harrison turned his attention to Dr. Finch, his expression now chillingly impassive. "Dr. Finch," he stated, his voice devoid of its earlier warmth, "I believe we will need to have a comprehensive review of the Advanced Diagnostic Wing's protocols and leadership, effective immediately." The implication hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Finch's reign as head of diagnostics was effectively over. His dismissal wouldn't be immediate, but the wheels had begun to turn. The elite patients who relied on St. Jude's would now demand answers, and the hospital could not afford to risk its reputation on a leader who had so spectacularly failed to diagnose a critical illness, especially when the solution had come from the lowest rung of his own department. His career, once gleaming like the chrome around him, had been tarnished beyond repair. The accolades he had tirelessly sought would now be replaced by the whispers of his greatest failure, a cautionary tale within the very circles he had strived so hard to impress. His team, who had so readily adopted Finch's dismissive attitude towards Elara, fared little better. Dr. Aris Thorne, Finch's right-hand man, a man who had often smirked at Elara's folk remedies, visibly paled. The self-assurance that usually radiated from him had evaporated, leaving behind a raw, exposed vulnerability. Other members of the team shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact, their expressions a mix of fear and dawning comprehension. They had been complicit in the arrogant dismissal, and now they, too, bore the brunt of the institutional failure. The trust in their technical proficiency, once unwavering, was now tainted by their collective blindness. Colleagues who had once envied their positions in the prestigious wing now looked at them with pity, or worse, open disdain. Their academic proficiency, once their shield, had become a spotlight on their lack of practical wisdom and empathy. They had been taught to analyze data, but not to truly observe, not to truly listen. This failure would stick to them, a stain on their pristine resumes, forcing them to reevaluate not just their methods, but the very principles that guided their medical practice. The hierarchy had indeed been redefined, and for Finch and his team, their fall from grace was just beginning. The institutional wheels, slow to turn but inexorable once set in motion, began to grind. Dr. Alastair Finch's carefully constructed facade of brilliance crumbled with shocking speed. The initial internal review, meant to be a superficial damage control exercise, quickly escalated as more cases were re-examined, each one highlighting a pattern of arrogant dismissal and misdiagnoses where Elara's quiet observations had been dismissed. The VIP patients, whose trust was paramount to St. Jude's reputation, began to withdraw their patronage, their loyalty shifting away from the gleaming diagnostics wing towards the very concept of thorough, human-centric care that Elara represented. Finch's lavish research grants, once a given, were frozen, then cancelled, as his methodologies were scrutinized and found to be deeply flawed by a lack of real-world applicability and an almost pathological aversion to unquantifiable data. The fall from grace for Finch was not a gentle descent but a brutal, public expulsion. His self-assured team, once basking in his reflected glory, found themselves adrift. Some, opportunistic and adaptable, quietly sought transfers to other departments, eager to distance themselves from the unfolding scandal. Others, genuinely talented but blinded by Finch's cult of personality, faced their own professional reckonings, their resumes now marked by association with the disgraced head. Finch himself, stripped of his administrative duties, then his privileges, faced an ethics committee investigation that threatened his medical license. His once articulate arguments now sounded desperate, defensive, echoing in empty boardrooms, devoid of the very data he so worshipped. The irony was exquisite. The man who had demanded quantifiable proof for everything found himself utterly unable to quantify his own value, reduced to a hollow shell of his former, self-important self. His ultimate fate was not just professional ruin, but a profound, personal humiliation, forced to acknowledge, however grudgingly, the superior insight of the woman he had so thoroughly underestimated. Meanwhile, a different kind of shift was happening for Elara. The quiet nurse, once invisible, found herself the reluctant focus of attention. Initially, it was awkward. Colleagues who had barely acknowledged her before now approached with hesitant apologies or overly effusive praise. Hospital administrators, keen to salvage St. Jude's reputation, offered her an accelerated promotion, a newly created head of observational diagnostics position within the very wing that had once scorned her. It came with a substantial raise, a corner office overlooking the city, and the promise of a dedicated team. Elara listened politely, her hands clasped in front of her, the familiar scent of antiseptic and old linen clinging to her uniform. She understood the gesture, the institution's need to demonstrate its newfound wisdom. But as she stood in the polished chrome office, the sterile air conditioning doing little to mask the subtle chemical scent of new furniture, she felt a quiet disconnect. This wasn't her authentic life. Her gift wasn't for managing budgets or attending board meetings, nor was her worth defined by the title offered or the salary attached. Her true value lay in the direct, intuitive connection with patients, and the quiet observation of their subtle shifts, the almost imperceptible changes that spoke volumes to her attuned senses. She politely declined the administrative role. Instead, Elara proposed a different kind of integration. She would remain a ward nurse, but with an expanded, recognized mandate. Her new role would be that of a diagnostic liaison, a bridge between the clinical floor and the advanced labs. She would conduct initial assessments for complex cases, her observations given precedence and immediately shared with a newly structured diagnostic team, one that now included younger, more open-minded specialists keen to learn from her unique approach. She would train new nurses and even junior doctors in the art of truly seeing and smelling, of trusting their practical instincts alongside the data. Her uniform remained simple, her shoes sensible, her hair pulled back, but her presence on the wards now carried an undeniable authority, a quiet gravitas born of validated competence. Elara's decision was met with a mix of surprise and grudging respect. It underscored her unshakable commitment to her calling, proving that her actions were never about personal ambition or external validation. Her triumph wasn't about ascending a corporate ladder, it was about elevating the standard of patient care. She returned to her shifts, to the familiar rhythms of the ward, the ever-present sense of healing and human vulnerability. The hushed tones of St. Jude's elite wing now carried a different undercurrent, a quiet reverence for the nurse who walked its corridors, her unassuming demeanor now recognized as a cloak for extraordinary insight. Her worth, she knew, had never depended on Dr. Finch's approval, nor on the accolades she now received. It was woven into the fabric of every patient whose suffering she eased, every mystery she solved, every life she touched. Her most profound reward was not the public recognition, but the private satisfaction of a life lived in service, her unique gifts fully realized and deeply appreciated by those who truly mattered, the patients themselves. Elara Vance had indeed redefined the hierarchy, not by seizing power, but by demonstrating the quiet, unwavering power of genuine care, keen observation, and an authentic, empathetic heart. Her journey back to her true self was complete, not in a grand exit, but in a profound reaffirmation of who she always was, now seen, truly seen, by the world around her. And there you have it, folks. What an incredible journey we've just shared, isn't it? As we close this chapter, remember that the core message isn't just a story, it's a mirror reflecting the incredible strength, resilience, and unique magic that resides within each one of you. Your own narrative holds immense power. I'd genuinely love to hear your thoughts. What part resonated most? What insights did you gain, or what personal experiences did this story bring to mind? Share your reflections in the comments below. Let's build a vibrant community where we can connect, learn, and celebrate our shared human journey. Your voice truly matters here. If you felt inspired, enlightened, or simply enjoyed our time together, please hit that follow button. Join us as we continue to explore powerful stories and ideas that uplift and empower. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for being part of this incredible adventure. Keep shining your light.